Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the GSMC television podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Chad, and on today's show, we are going to talk about the Critics' Choice Awards. We're going to look at one of the big winners from that night, the Best Short Form Series winner, called Ethics Training with Kim Wexler. We're going to look at some of the other winners that also had been nominated or won Golden Globes to kind of follow up on my Golden Globes podcast from last week. Then we'll take a look at an AMC show called Better Call Saul. We're going to discuss Fantasy Suites Week on The Bachelor, one of my favorite shows, as I'm sure you all know. And we're going to wrap up the show by pouring one out for 12 of the series that have been canceled. All right, so let's get started without further ado. Critics' Choice Awards. Before I jump into the Critics' Choice Awards, I want to reference real quick an article I read in CNN Business. I'm going to post it on the GSMC television podcast Twitter feed so that you can check it out. But basically it was talking about how pandemic television habits have shifted and how that impacts things like award shows. As I was reading this article, I started thinking about my television viewing pre-pandemic and the fact that I had cable. I would get home from work, I'd make dinner, I'd sit down, I'd watch shows live on network television. Pandemic hit, I got rid of cable, and I've been watching everything on streaming networks like Netflix, Hulu, Apple TV, and the rest. And so the article was talking about how I'm not unique in that. Like many people have shifted their television viewing to more streaming as they've looked for different methods and means of entertainment during the pandemic, and how this shift is having an impact on things like award shows. And it started talking about just starting with the numbers, like basic viewership, and the fact that the Golden Globes had pulled in about 16.9 million viewers, which was down from the previous year. Last weekend's Grammy show, which you can see the pre-show on YouTube now, but the Grammys did 8.8 million viewers, which was down 53% from the previous year, when it was up over 18 million, which I thought was just so amazing, especially given, it's the Grammys. I mean, people tune in just for those performances, but apparently, with streaming and the way people's habits have changed, we're watching more things on YouTube and other methods. And so the article goes on to talk about kind of how the numbers continue to decline. And I'm thinking, as I was reading this article, do people really want to see award shows? I know that's something I thought about not just when reading this article, but when I was prepping the Golden Globes episode of my podcast, and for this one. And I know that I personally have really appreciated some of the COVID shifts that award shows have made, specifically to the pre-show. getting rid of that traditional red carpet, doing more of these kind of one-on-one, more intimate at-home interviews with different celebrities, I thought was really cool. And so the article goes on to talk about how award shows, while it would seem like you could just do away with them fairly easily, that really they're unique. They're unique in that an award show kind of has that confluence of multiple different industries all kind of coming together to produce and put on this one night extravaganza. So you've got music and comedy and film and TV and movies and all these different things. But more important than that, award shows employ thousands of people. When you think about the lighting and the set designers and the costumers and all of what goes into the award shows, even the people that are driving the limos that drop the stars off, like it's a huge job maker. And so it was kind of interesting. I'm gonna post the article on our Twitter page. I highly recommend checking it out. It was really helpful for me just to kind of prompt some more thinking around these award shows, because I think for me, when I initially thought about it, it was very easy for me to go, well, of course nobody wants to see an award show. Why would we want to watch a bunch of people with tons of money walking down a carpet in fancy clothes when, there are people that are trying to find jobs and, struggling to figure out how to pay rent. And, I didn't see it as kind of this escape as much as like a TV show is. But at the same time, I've spent tons of time looking at clips of the shows on YouTube. So clearly there's some kind of draw there for me. So I just thought that was interesting. I wanted to mention it, especially since today we're going to start off talking about an award show, the Critics' Choice Awards. So the Critics' Choice Awards aired on March 7th on the CW network. A little bit about the Critics' Choice Awards. The group that determines who's nominated and does the voting is the CCA. It is the largest critics organization in the U.S. and Canada and represents more than 400 TV, radio, and online critics, as well as entertainment reporters. It was established in 2019 with the merger of two groups, the Broadcast Film Critics Association and the Broadcast TV Journalists Association, in recognition of the blurring of the lines, so to speak, between film, TV, and streaming. So I thought that was very interesting. Wanted to get that out there because I think it's helpful to know kind of who's picking all this. There were a lot of similarities between the TV shows that were nominated for Critics' Choice Awards and those that were nominated for Golden Globes. The series The Crown was a big series for the Golden Globes. It was a popular one. Same for the Critics' Choice Awards. In fact, it was nominated for 6 categories. And I'm just going to kind of quickly go through some of the ones it was nominated for and won. So it won for Best Drama Series. It also won that category in the Golden Globes. In Best Drama Actor and Best Drama Actress, it took home the Critics' Choice Awards. Josh O'Connor for his role as Prince Charles in The Crown, and Emma Corrin for her role as Princess Diana on the show The Crown. Josh O'Connor had also won the Golden Globe for his performance. Gillian Anderson was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in a Drama. She won that, and she won the Golden Globe. Then there was some love for my favorite new show, Ted Lasso. It had been nominated for 2 Golden Globes. It actually got nominated for 3 Critics' Choice Awards, and it took home awards for Best Comedy Series and Best Comedy Actor for Jason Sudeikis. It had won both of those Golden Globes as well. And then Schitt's Creek which I covered in my Golden Globes special. Got several nominations, one for Best Comedy Actress for Catherine O'Hara. She won that award. She also won the Golden Globe for that category. And then there was a shout out for Best Comedy Actor, or Supporting Actor rather, for Dan Levy, the creator of the show. He did not, however, win in that category. So yeah, it was interesting to see the kind of carryover between the ones that were critically recognized for Golden Globes and how that kind of translated into the Critics' Choice Awards. But the award that I wanted to focus on briefly, just to kind of talk about, actually is for Best Short Film Series. Now, there were 6 nominees in this category, and 5 out of 6 were series on Quibi. For those of you who have no idea what the heck Quibi is, Quibi was a streaming service that was created in 2018, and it focused on short-form series that could be watched on your cell phone. Like, all of the formatting, everything was made for your cell phone. Quick, fast, easy, like 10 minutes and less kind of thing. That network, or that app, actually folded late 2020. September of 2020, they closed down after about a year and a half. And in the time that they were operating, they generated 1,800 pieces of content for that streaming platform. It's my understanding that that content got sold to Roku. So I'm not really sure. No one seems to really know what's going to happen with that content. Is Roku going to try to kind of revive this Quibi model, or are they just going to somehow incorporate that in that content into their streaming platform, their own streaming platform kind of thing? But regardless of what happens with the content, 5 of their series were nominated for Critics' Choice Awards, which I thought was pretty phenomenal considering. There was only one that wasn't a Quibi product, and that's one on YouTube called Ethics Training with Kim Wexler. And I thought, I'm going to check it out because it's on YouTube. And I can. So I went to YouTube, pulled it up. It's a 10-part short series from AMC. So Kim Wexler is actually a character from the AMC series Better Call Saul. And in this short series, it's like these advertisements for a law office. And each episode deals with a different kind of aspect. So in the first episode, they were dealing with how to market a law office ethically. And so you get Kim Wexler sitting behind. Kim Wexler, by the way, is played by Rhea Seehorn. And she's sitting behind a desk, this large wooden desk, and she starts kind of talking direct to the camera about the importance of marketing your law office, but doing it in an ethical way. And she talks about things like no solicitation, and then there's like kind of a comic strip that illustrates not soliciting. And then she talks about no misleading language. And again, there's like a little kind of animation that speaks to that piece. She talks about the importance of using proper disclaimers in your advertising for your law office. And then the last one that she talks about is the importance of word of mouth for a law office. And that's it. It's like short, sweet. She kind of sums it up at the end, and it's done. The whole thing's over in like 3 minutes. Like I said, there's 10 parts. Each part is about 3 minutes, 2.5 to 3 minutes. Highly recommend checking it out. Really easy watch. If you are a fan of Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, this is going to be right up your alley. And it won a Critics' Choice Award. And I can see why. It was fun. It was witty. And it actually, I enjoyed watching it so much that it prompted me to check out Better Call Saul, which we will be talking about after the break. So stay tuned.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
All right, welcome back to the GSMC television podcast with your host, Chad. Before the break, we were talking about the Critics' Choice Awards and the winner for the Best Short Form Series, Ethics Training with Kim Wexler. And I mentioned that the character of Kim Wexler is from the AMC television show Better Call Saul. So I enjoyed the short series, and I decided, you know what? I haven't seen Better Call Saul. I've heard it's a good show. I'm going to check it out. Now, before I get into the episode that I watched of Better Call Saul, I want to give you a little bit of background. Better Call Saul is a prequel to the extremely popular series Breaking Bad. And I had only watched 5 episodes of Breaking Bad. A friend of mine, I was at their house. She was raving about how great this show was, and so we sat down one evening and binged 5 episodes, and it was about the 5th episode that she passed out asleep, and I was like, okay, I've watched enough. And I never went back. I watched it. I get it. It was great, but I never went back to the series. So I decided to check out Better Call Saul. And I cannot tell you how happy I am that I did. So I went to the beginning. I went to Better Call Saul, Season 1, Episode 1 on Netflix. And it is a really interesting show. Okay, so the episode starts with a black and white. It's all black and white, and you see people doing work. It looks like they're working in a bakery of some sort. You don't really know what kind of bakery, but there's this kind of old school 1930s, 40s song that actually is entitled "Address Unknown." And it was by a group called the Ink Spots. And as the scene continues, you realize that it is a Cinnabon in a mall, like you've seen all over America. And the person working there, going through all these different kind of tasks, is this kind of middle-aged man with a mustache, and he's kind of going through everything very unenergetically, like his soul dies a little bit every time he comes to work. Like you just get this sense. But at the same time, there's this underlying sense that he's always on alert. And this feeling is kind of reinforced as he's standing at the counter making some kind of blended drink, and he looks across the room and there's a man sitting in a booth and he's kind of staring in his direction or at him. And the longer this moment in the scene continues, the more uneasy he seems to become. And at one point, the man gets up and starts walking straight toward the counter. And you see kind of this bristling in the man behind the counter's body language, and then a release when the guy who got up just walked right past him and went out into the mall to say hello to a woman who was standing with a couple of her friends. Then we cut to a glass on a counter with the ingredients of a rusty nail being put into to work, and the man goes and sits down in a large easy chair to enjoy his drink. And at some point, and the scene is still in black and white, he gets up and he kind of looks around, through the windows, and he closes the curtains, and you just get this feeling like he's very, very not frightened, but like something's not right. And he closes all the curtains in the room, and he goes back to the hallway and reaches down into the bottom of the closet where there's like a false panel in the back, and he removes it and pulls out a shoebox. And I'm thinking he's getting a gun. Like, I'm thinking there's something, he's like expecting someone to come bursting through his door or something, and so he's going for a gun. And instead he grabs a VHS tape. And he takes the VHS tape and he walks back to the living room, and he puts the VHS tape into the player and sits down. And that's when you hear what sounds like a series of ads for a law office in the background. And so I, having just watched the short series with Kim Wexler, where it was like an ad for law offices, and a whole series of them, this was like, aha, okay, I see what you did there. And I smiled. It was fun. So then the scene kind of cuts, and all of a sudden we're in full color. We're in a courtroom, and you see everyone sitting around. The judge is sitting there, and they're all waiting on something. You don't really know what they're waiting on, but they're all sitting borderline impatiently waiting for something. And at some point, the judge motions to the bailiff, and the bailiff gets up and he leaves the courtroom and he goes to the bathroom. And before the bailiff gets to the bathroom door, we see inside the bathroom. And the bathroom is in black and white. And we can hear someone practicing their speech, their closing arguments kind of thing. But the problem is we can't really see this person. We see the back of him from like the door. And then we start getting all of these different camera angles. And the camera angles all include one thing, and that is the urinal. So it's like you're seeing him from behind with the urinal in the background. And then there's a shot where the camera's like laying on the ground on its side, shooting his feet with the urinal and the urinal cake that's been kicked out of the urinal onto the floor in the background, or in the foreground. And it's all of these really, really interesting shots with this urinal. And it's kind of a foreshadowing for what we're about to learn about this attorney, who, as we find out, is struggling. He's down on his luck. His law office is not successful. And so I just thought it was so interesting how they shot this scene. And so the bailiff comes in the bathroom and says, hey, it's time to go. And so he goes, all right. And he turns around and he heads back out. And all of a sudden he enters the courtroom with all this energy. We're back to full color. And he walks up and he gives his closing argument on behalf of the three defendants that he's working for, who are 19-year-old guys who did something really questionable with a corpse. And that's why they're being charged. And he gives his closing argument, and it's great. It's just, and he sits down and he's got this look like, yeah, I did it. We're home free. And so then the prosecutor, without saying a word, stands up, takes a VHS tape off of his table and walks to the side of the courtroom, and he proceeds to grab a media cart. Now, anybody who's been in a school in the 80s, 90s, maybe even early 2000s knows the media cart. You know, you got that big cathode ray tube television with the VHS tape underneath, and then the two metal cabinet doors, and you got to wheel that thing out every time there's a substitute to watch whatever, you know, video your teacher left for them that day. And that's exactly what this prosecutor's doing, only it's like the biggest TV you've ever seen, and the wheels aren't quite right, and he's slowly, you know, kind of struggling with this rattling cart across the courtroom as he gets it right in front of the jury and puts the tape in and hits play, and the jury gets to see the questionable things that the boys are involved in. And then we cut to a scene where our main character, Jimmy McGill, played by Bob Odenkirk, is standing in front of the bursar, getting his check for the public defender work that he just did for these 3 19-year-old boys who, by the way, were found guilty and are going to jail now, despite his defense. And he's arguing with the bursar about the amount of money. And the fact that she's trying to give him a check for $700, and he's like, hey, I'm supposed to be getting $700 per defendant. And she says, no, it's $700 per case. And he's going back and forth, and she finally just kind of says, look, no one told you had to try them all together. You get $700. And he responds with, I'm never doing public defender work here again, and goes storming out with his check to his very beat up old car. Before getting in the car, he gets a phone call, and we're continuing to get these kind of breadcrumbs that kind of help to flesh out this character, his background, what's going on for him in the moment as he's answering the phone, and he kind of puts on this quasi-British accent as he's talking to the client there, and he's saying, hey, my office is being fumigated. Maybe we should meet at this diner, blah, 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 down the street, yada, 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 yada. So he sets up this meeting, and they go, and they end up meeting in the diner. And it's a couple. The husband's been accused of embezzling a large sum of money, and Jimmy McGill is working to try to become his attorney. And he's got this document that he's wanting him to sign. And you kind of get this sense that he's trying to get the guy to sign it because it's really important that he gets this case, but he's trying not to let on that it's really important that he gets this case. And the wife continues to be kind of hesitant as they're having this conversation. And so there's kind of a break in the sales pitch, so to speak, and the husband's reading through the contract for Jimmy's services, and picks up the pen and is about to sign when his wife grabs his hand and says, honey, why don't we sleep on it? And you can just see this like letdown and in Jimmy that he's trying hard to kind of hide. And so he says, great, I'll follow up with you guys tomorrow, kind of thing. And the couple leaves, and he's left sitting there, not having achieved his goal. And the next scene, we see him in his rather beat up car, and he's driving down the road, and he's kind of, multitasking. He's on the phone with the florist, and he's trying to order these flowers to send to the couple to thank them for meeting with him and to, try to continue to encourage them to work with him. And he's saying things like, I want an arrangement that's big but not too big, and I want an arrangement that has flowers that look expensive, but I don't want them to actually be expensive. And it's all about this appearance of something wonderful, even though he wants it to be as cheap as he can. And so he's given the credit card number, and boom! All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this skateboarder comes, hits the front end of his car, busts out the windshield. He slams on the brakes, gets out, and just panicked. Like, oh man, could this day be any worse, kind of thing. And And as he's coming around the car to go check on this skateboarder that he hit, another skateboarder comes riding up with a video camera, and he's yelling like, "Hey, you hit my friend," and this, that, and the other thing, and threatens to call the police. And so Jimmy's like, "Hey, don't call the police. Well, there's got to be something we can do." And the guys are like, "Yeah, well, give us $500 kind of thing." There's this moment where it's like Jimmy realizes what's going on here, and he agrees to the $500, but instead of giving them $500, he walks up and kicks the guy that's on the ground in the leg, the one that's supposed to be broken, and calls them out for their con, because both guys are fine. And he says, "Look, you picked the wrong guy. I'm an attorney." And this spooks the two skateboarders, who grab their stuff and go running off. And then he gets back into his car and he travels off to this nail salon, which, as we're about to find out, is where his office is. He actually lives in the back of the nail salon in this little kind of room. And again, this show has, over the course of its time on AMC, has been nominated and won a number of different awards. It's gotten great accolades, and one of the accolades that it's gotten is for its cinematography, and it continued to just really, really, really excite me with the cinematography. Even his office, we see him come up to the door, and there's like the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with the name of his law office on it, taped to the door with Scotch tape. And then when we go into his office, the first way we see it is from the ceiling, looking down through the drop ceiling where most of the panels are missing, kind of thing. And there's just all of this fun stuff that's happening with the camera and the angles and the lighting and being used to kind of show not just things about the character, but also relationships. One of the things that I thought about as I was watching the show is the movie Casino, which does a lot of really fun things in the cinematography with light and camera angles to show relationship. But I digress. So we see him in his office. He's going through his mail. He opens a piece of mail, and there's a $26,000 check in it. And I'm like, hot dog, his day has turned around. And then he rips the check up into a bunch of tiny pieces. And I'm like, why would you do that? So the next scene, we see him going to a very ritzy law office where he walks into the conference room. He makes this big, obnoxious entrance and then proceeds to drop all of the check pieces on the table. And he starts talking about how he can't be bought off. Specifically, they can't be bought off. And he's talking about someone by the name of Walter, and he keeps talking about how they cannot buy him off, and they need to just cash out his share of the company. And that was when I realized that there was a shot of the law office sign, and there were 3 partners, and one of the partners was McGill. Only it wasn't Jimmy McGill that he's talking about. It's this Walter McGill. And so they go back and forth about whether or not he's going to be returning, and Jimmy saying, look, I'm doing what's best for him. You need to cash him out. He throws out a number. It's like $17 million. And he's told no. And he kind of leaves the law office determined to get what he's asking for, but acknowledging he's not getting it that day. Next scene, we see him putting all of his belongings, his cell phone, his watch, his wallet, his keys, into a mailbox outside a home in what looks like, any subdivision in America. And he goes in, only there's no lights. There's no lights anywhere. And he lights this like camping lantern with a lighter, and then he goes in and he goes to a kitchen where there's like a cooler that's full of water with some things floating in it, and he like drains the water and puts fresh ice in, and then puts some food in there before going into this dimly lit, what looks like a study kind of room, and there's a man sitting there, and as we find out, the man is his older brother, and something's happened with his older brother. They don't really go into what's happened, but he's afraid of radiation. Hence leaving all the cell phone and stuff in the mailbox outside. He doesn't have any appliances or electricity running. Everything's these old school kind of camping lanterns. But he's still got his mental faculties. He's talking about law and everything, and he's talking to Jimmy and telling him, he's coming back to the firm someday, and when he gets better. And Jimmy's trying to convince him that, no, that ship sailed. You need to just cash out. That's what's best for everybody. And he ends up sharing with his brother that he's been supporting both of them. He's been trying to support both of them with his struggling law practice, and he can't continue to do that. And so his brother gets upset, and he's like, look, I appreciate that, and I'm going to get better. And that's the end of it, kind of thing. And, like a good brother does, you say, okay, yeah, you're right, and he then finds out that his brother's partner, who he had just spoken with earlier that day and had been turning down money from, in the hopes of getting this larger kind of payout, had come over and had talked to his brother directly and had been sending checks to his brother, and the very thing he'd been trying to avoid was happening without him knowing it. And so he leaves his brother's house, and when we see Jimmy next, he's at a skate park, and he's finds the two skateboarders who had tried to con him the day before. And he approaches them with a business proposition. And this is where we start to get a sense of Jimmy as potentially not having the most honorable of pasts, so to speak, as he begins to lay out a con that he wants them to work with him on, to try to get thousands of dollars from this Mark. And so he lays out the con. They walk it, they talk about it, they figure out all the details, and then they decide that, yep, we're gonna do this. And so the time comes for them to pull this off. And so the skateboarders are in their position, and they get a call from Jimmy that the car's on the way, and they pull out in front of the car and get hit, and they expect for the driver to get out. Only the driver doesn't get out of the car. Instead, the driver just keeps on driving. So the two skateboarders do something that wasn't in the plan, and that is follow the car. And they're calling Jimmy while holding on to a truck on their skateboards following this car. And they let him know what went wrong. And Jimmy's like, okay, hang tight. I'm going to come find you. So he goes riding off in his car to find these skateboarders. Well, the car stops at a house, and the skateboarders are doing their shtick, right? You broke my leg, and we'll call the police if you don't do this and that, and they're talking to this little older, like senior grandmother type character, and she's Spanish speaking and doesn't understand a word of what they're saying, but she's clearly disturbed by everything. And so she takes them to her house. She takes them into her house, and the door closes. And then we see Saul kind of driving down the road, and he sees the skateboards sitting in the front yard, and so the car parked in the driveway, and so he goes, oh, okay, they're here. He parks his car, and he goes up to the door and knocks. And I've got this assumption that he's gonna, find the guys, and they're gonna continue with their con. And instead, when he knocks on the door, he's greeted with a handgun to the face, and the episode ends. I think what I liked the most about this show was the cinematography. I thought that what was being done was innovative. It was fun. It kind of really helped to kind of pull me through the story in a good way. And I found myself enjoying the episode so much that I went right into the second episode immediately after. Highly recommend checking out this series. If you're a fan of Breaking Bad, you've probably already seen it. If you haven't, definitely check it out. But even if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, that's fine. This is the prequel. It tells the story of Jimmy McGill and his kind of process and of evolution into Saul Goodman, the character in Breaking Bad. So you don't have to have seen that to enjoy Better Call Saul. All right, we are going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to talk about the Bachelor Fantasy Suites week, and then we are going to, you're going to want to stick around to the end, because at the end we are going to pour one out for 12 of the shows that have been canceled this year.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, welcome back to the GSMC television podcast with your host, Chad. We are going to talk about one of my favorite shows, The Bachelor. I want to warn you, there are some spoilers in this section. I will try to make sure to remind you before I say anything too important, but definitely I'll be talking a little bit about what happened during the Fantasy Suites episode last week of The Bachelor. So if you haven't caught that yet and you are a fan of Bachelor, you're going to want to pause this podcast, go watch that episode, and then come back and pick up. All right, here we go. Fantasy Suites week. So for those of you that don't watch the show, when we get down to 3 contestants, they have what's known as Fantasy Suites dates, where each individual gets to go on an all-day long date with the Bachelor. And then at the end of the date, they have dinner, and they are presented with a card and a key. If they decide they want to, they can stay the night together without the producers and cameras and sound people and all of those things, just privately in a suite, just the two of them, to have deeper conversation and, as people tend to assume, other things in the fantasy suite. It's really the first time that any of these dating couples will get to spend kind of unsupervised time together. And so a lot of times these dates are extremely important, especially the fantasy suite portion, because it gives them the opportunity to really dig very deeply into more personal concerns or conversations as the Bachelor is trying to decide in the next 2 weeks who he's going to propose to. So this episode started off a little bit differently. Matt, our bachelor, he's been very open about the fact that he was a single child, that there was some sort of problem between his mother and his father that occurred very early in life, and that his dad really hasn't been part of the picture for a number of years. And so I found it very interesting that we started this episode with Matt in his private apartment meeting with his dad. So this conversation is really kind of interesting. Matt and his dad, they greet each other very warmly. They go sit down on the couch. They start talking. And Matt kind of starts having this conversation about how his father not being around has affected him, has affected his relationships in the past, and how he's trying to get to a place where those things are reconciled, because he's got to make a decision. He's falling in love with these women. He needs to choose one to propose to, and this thing keeps kind of hanging over him because in the past he's kind of avoided commitment because of fears of not being able to be the man that he feels in his mind he needs to be for the woman he loves. And all of that stems from kind of the example left for him by his father. And so it's really interesting to watch his dad, who really kind of tries to brush over it. Really is not eager in the moment to get deep down into kind of the dirty of the conversation, and who can blame him? I mean, I always assume, especially in COVID, that there's been some sort of pre-conversation that he knows why he's there and what Matt wants to discuss, but we don't get to see any of that. And so it really seems like the guy's come over to just kind of check in and see where his son's at in this process, and then gets blindsided with this, throwing and airing his dirty laundry out on national television for, millions of people to watch. And so it was kind of an awkward beginning to the conversation. And the father even says, I'm here to celebrate with you. And Matt was very quick to respond to that with, this isn't a celebration. If I wanted to celebrate, we'd be at Chuck E. Cheese, kind of hearkening back to this deep, deep, deep childhood trauma that he has with his dad. The conversation, I'm sure, was probably one of those that took place over the course of, several hours, that got edited down into like a 10-minute bite. And so as a viewer, you don't feel like there's really any kind of resolution. We just kind of see Matt kind of giving it to his dad and telling him that he forgives him. But there's really no kind of deeper conversation or joint kind of reconciliation that we see, although Matt does continue to acknowledge the fact that this is just a starting point for a rebuild on their relationship. But after the conversation, his dad leaves, and he shares with the camera that he seems to have gotten some peace from the conversation, that he's realizing that he's nothing like his father. And it seems like he's, feeling a lot better and ready to move on with his dates that week with each of the women and be ready to make a decision. And so his first date is with Michelle. Michelle is a 27-year-old teacher. She's my personal favorite of the final three. I just have really enjoyed Michelle. I think she's got great energy, and they seem to get along really, really well. So Michelle meets with Matt, and they are doing a Pennsylvania Dutch spa date. Now, I Googled it. I cannot find anything that references a Pennsylvania Dutch spa date or spa and what that would entail anywhere on the internet. And if you can't find it on Google, it doesn't exist. Try it. The only thing that comes up is their date. So I literally went down the rabbit hole and I started looking up all of the different things that were included in their spa date. So when they walked in, they saw a tub of what looked like milk. There was literally a platter full of sticks of butter and a massage table. And then there was like a bin, rustic kind of box full of what looks like an oatmeal foot bath. So I took those components and I Googled it, and here's what I found out. Milk baths are a 2020 beauty trend. Apparently, Cleopatra was known to have taken donkey milk baths regularly to preserve her beauty. You can use any milk for a milk bath. In each type of milk offers its own benefits far beyond just the ubiquitous skin nourishment. And one fun, maybe a little cringy fact that I found that's a little bit odd is that, milk baths are actually good for babies, but that it's best to use human breast milk because there's the anti-inflammatory effects that can be used to soothe a number of issues in babies like eczema and diaper rash. So apparently milk topically been used for a very long time. In addition to the milk, you add your hot water in your milk, but you can also put herbs and essential oils and add things like honey and Epsom salts and baking sodas. That's all kind of common additives that increase the skin benefits. So if you're feeling like relaxing, try a milk bath. Butter massage, apparently also a thing. Butter is really good for your skin because it's loaded with vitamin A and fatty acids. And so, using softened butter on your face, I guess, is a great way to soothe your skin. And also always have some butter ready for your toast. Last off, the oatmeal foot bath. There's oatmeal lotions, things like that. Oatmeal is great for soothing dry skin. So oatmeal foot bath, also a thing. They go through this spa and they're literally doing it together. It's not like there's, some masseuse that's there doing a couple's massage for them. They're kind of massaging the butter into each other and sitting and, doing the foot soak and the milk bath together, just with the cameras and stuff and just bonding through that kind of interesting moment. They then go to dinner. Where, as is typical for this point in the process, usually the woman he's dating is expressing how much she's fallen for him, and usually the guy is reassuring the woman in some way, shape, or form that he too is starting to have feelings for them, and then they present the card and decide whether or not they're going to spend the night together. During the dinner conversation, Matt shares with Michelle the fact that he met with his dad, that he was kind of working through these challenges, and that it brought clarity to him that he's nothing like his father. And you can kind of get the sense that Michelle's like, okay, great. She's feeling really good about the date. She's feeling really good about where they're at. And so when it comes time to decide, is she going to spend the night with him? She says yes. They go off to this beautiful suite, and then we see them the next morning. They're super happy, lying in bed together, and Michelle goes back to the house so that Matt can get ready for his next fantasy suite date. They really never tell you how many days are in between each date. The way the show's edited and the way the conversations are happening, it kind of sounded like Michelle got back and Bree was getting ready to go that very next day kind of thing. I listened to several Bachelor-related podcasts, and it's my understanding from some of those conversations that there's usually like a day in between these dates, but I can't confirm that. So next date is with Bree. Bree and Matt keep having these like outdoorsy dates, which is kind of interesting. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I sometimes kind of wonder when you're spending your date off-roading, which is totally fun and I'm sure bond-worthy, just how romantic can it really get, especially on their dates, because we really haven't seen a tremendous amount of romantic connection, even though it's clear that they're close and they like each other. I was a little distracted at the start of this date. Matt was wearing this really odd sweater, just very chunky and in weird colors, with skinny jeans that had been tight rolled, in a way that clearly took a significant amount of 80s know-how to be able to pull it off so excellently. And so I spent the first few seconds of the date just like, dude, seriously, what are you wearing with that sweater? And wow, with the tight roll. Then they greet, and, as always, Bree jumps into his arms. There's the big wraparound leg hug, and Matt shares with her what they're going to be doing. And in this case, yet again, Bree has an outdoor date that he presents as camping in the woods. So they load their little packs and they start walking on this woodsy hike. And then they arrive at this kind of preset camping area where they've got kind of the rocks in the fire pit all set up for them. And they begin to pitch their tent. Now, I, at this moment, was mortified for Bree that Michelle had the really nice suite and Bree seemingly is going to be, roughing it out in a tent overnight. And they, after several kind of funny scenes of them trying to set up the tent and Bree having to help Matt because he's completely not tent setup worthy, we find out that this was just a fun activity and that they aren't actually going to be camping. So both Bree and I were able to take a sigh of relief because we knew that they were not going to be freezing their butt off overnight. So they make some s'mores and then we cut to their dinner. Bree, for weeks, has been very, very, very open with Matt about how much she likes him, going so far as to letting him know a few weeks ago that she quit her job to continue to date him. No pressure. So their dinner goes much as you would expect. She shares that she's in love with him. He shares that he's growing feelings for her. They have the choice to go back to the fantasy suite. They choose to go back to the fantasy suite. And then in the morning, they wake up in bed and everything is wonderful. Bree is optimistic. Matt's feeling happy. Bree goes back to the house and all heck breaks loose with Rachel. Rachel has been struggling all episode. Every time one of the women comes back, she's struggling with the fact that they've been with him and not knowing how does he feel about her. And it was bad when Michelle came back, but now that Bree's returned, it's ratcheted up times 10. And Rachel's insecurities and discomfort and all of that are just more than she can take. And so in classic Bachelor fashion, we get to see her having the full-on meltdown. And then they do this rather abrupt cut to their date. So Rachel meets Matt for her one-on-one date. And you can tell from the very start that something is wrong. I mean, her energy is off. Unlike all the other girls who run up and do the leg wrap hug, she just kind of walks up, slow stroll, gives him a hug. He's smiling and energized and excited, and she's just like, ugh. And he goes to take her to where they're going for their date, as they start walking off, and then you get this kind of overlay of him talking about how he can tell something's wrong, and you're just kind of wondering, when is she going to say something, and whether or not this is going to permeate their entire date. So they get to this building, and she finds out that what they're doing is a pottery date. They're going to make pottery. So there's a woman there, an artist, who set up all the little wheels and the clay and all of that, and gives them a quick tutorial, which Rachel is so not into. And then she and Matt sit down at their individual potter's wheels, and they start trying to kind of make their pot. And it's just clear to Matt that there's something that needs to be addressed. And so he decides to kind of broach that conversation with her. And so she says, yeah, absolutely, we need to talk. And Matt kind of pulls her aside, and they start to have this really big conversation about what she's feeling. And there's these pottery references, in there that she's trying to use as part of the analogy. And basically she lets him know, look, I'm really struggling with this. I don't know where we stand. It's been really hard to see you with these other women, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Matt listens intently, as he does. And then he lets her know, look, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way, but please don't, because, I'm here. I'm in it. I'm with you. We're good, kind of thing. And they have this reconciliation. Rachel ends up getting all of her concerns addressed, and they go back to being lovey-dovey, and we see them, doing the ghost thing at the pottery wheel, and making out a whole bunch as they leave to head to dinner. Their conversation continues at dinner, and much like he did with Michelle and much like he did with Bree, he goes through with Rachel his conversation with his father, why he had the conversation, how he's come to a place of peace, that he's nothing like his dad, and is ready for this process, and ready to be able to be a strong partner for her should he should they get to that point. And the dinner and conversation goes well. They end up spending the night together, and all is good to go. Now the transition from Rachel's date to the final rose ceremony is really, really abrupt. And we just kind of cut right to the women getting ready for this next big rose ceremony. And they all arrive. They're standing in a room. For those of you who are fans of the show but haven't watched the episode, I'm about to drop a spoiler. So you may want to turn down your volume for like 60 seconds. But the three women are standing in the room, and he's starting to give out roses, and the first person he calls is Michelle, and he gives Michelle the rose, and now you've got the last two, and of course the camera's bouncing back and forth. Is it going to be Bree? Is it going to be Rachel? Is it going to be Bree? Is it going to be Rachel? And it's Rachel. Bree is crushed at her elimination. He walks her out. They're waiting for the car, which I thought was interesting because a lot of times the car is like waiting there already for them. But in this case, they had to sit on a bench and wait for the car to come to take Bree away, which I thought was really sucky for Bree. And so she's blindsided. She feels completely blindsided and really doesn't have a lot to say to him. And I got to give props to Bree. For someone who was as invested as she appeared to be, she really held it together very well, not just during the conversation with him waiting for the car, but in the car as well. And so that that was the end. He comes back in and kind of preps the two ladies for the remaining part of the process, which is the next week when they meet his family, and ultimately he chooses one of them to propose to. So yeah, that's my recap of the Bachelor Fantasy Suites episode. Next week, I'm going to be recapping the finale of The Bachelor, as well as the After the Final Rose episode, so be sure to tune in for that. And we're going to take our last break. When we come back, we're going to pour one out for some canceled shows.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Television Podcast. I'm your host, Chad, and we are going to wrap up today by talking about some of the canceled shows for 2021. So get your beverage ready as we pour one out for shows like Last Man Standing. Tim Allen and his on-screen wife Nancy Travis will be saying goodbye to us after 9 seasons. Great show, Stumptown, based on a comic book. This crime drama enjoyed moderate popularity with viewers and had been slated for a second season. But it fell victim to COVID delays and has now been canceled, although there are rumors that ABC is shopping the show around, trying to find a new network for it. The popular show Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a procedural comedy, spent 5 years on Fox before it was canceled and then picked up by NBC, where Adam Sandberg and his cast of characters enjoyed 3 more seasons. It's now wrapping up for good. One of my favorites, Drunk History, a show that combined education and alcohol by having a drunk narrator tell stories of historical events like the Boston Tea Party on Comedy Central. It's unfortunately calling it quits after 6 seasons as a result of the COVID pandemic. Tosh.0, Daniel Tosh's internet clip show, has been a favorite of mine for years as well. Now, in its 12th season, it has been announced that it will not be returning for a 13th. Another comedy I haven't seen, High Maintenance, based on the adventures of a weed delivery man starring Ben Sinclair. It's ending after 4 seasons on HBO. The Outsider, which was written by Stephen King. It's a psychological thriller. It's not going to be getting a second season on its network HBO, but it is said by Stephen King that he has finished season 2 and is shopping it around to other networks. The popular show 13 Reasons Why, after achieving critical acclaim during its early seasons, it's been announced by Netflix that the 4th season will be its last. A show that I enjoyed watching, and we'll probably talk about at some point on this podcast, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which is kind of like a darker tale of the teenage witch, has unfortunately been canceled by Netflix after just 2 seasons. And for fans of wrestling, Glow, which stands for the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, it was expected to return for one final season, but alas, it is another show that has fallen victim to the COVID pandemic and has been canceled due to extensive production delays. Just 2 more shows, both on Netflix. The Order has been canceled after 2 seasons, and Vikings, after 6 seasons on Netflix, has been announced. It is ending its run as well. Well, folks, that's it. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Television Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us out. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining in today, and be sure to check in next week for my podcast covering the finale of The Bachelor, as well as after the final rose. Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.